Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe and support me. The low hum of fluorescent lights buzzed above Dr. Ethan Miles as he stared down at the wrinkled hand of his patient, the skin pale and lifeless. With a heavy sigh, he placed the patient's hand gently back on the bed and pulled the sterile white sheet over the still body. Another life lost, another soul that could have been saved if only the system hadn't failed them. Ethan stood in the doorway of the hospital room for a moment, watching as a nurse hurried inside to handle the grim paperwork. He didn't stay to see the tears of the family that would soon follow. He didn't have the stomach for it anymore. Too many lives had slipped through his fingers. Not because of his medical skill, but because they couldn't afford the one thing that could save Emma, a cloned organ. Organ cloning had become the pinnacle of medical advancement, the cure for what once seemed like inevitable death. Hearts, livers, lungs, all grown perfectly in a lab from a patient's own DNA. No risk of rejection, no need for endless medications. The technology existed, but only for those who could pay, and few could. BioNTech, the pharmaceutical titan, held a monopoly on the technology, locking it behind impossible fees. They had turned organ transplants into a luxury, reserved for the wealthiest of the wealthy, while the rest of humanity was left to wither. Ethan had once believed in the system, in medicine's promise to heal. Now, it was nothing more than a business of death. Ethan moved swiftly down the hospital corridor, the sounds of beeping machines and hushed voices filling the space around him. Every step felt like a weight on his chest, each footfall echoing with the memory of the patient he had just lost. They had come to him, desperate, with hope in their eyes that he could somehow work a miracle. And all he could do was watch them fade away. As he pushed through the swinging doors into the cold night air, Ethan clenched his fists. He was done playing by the rules of this broken system. If BioNTech thought they could profit off the misery of the sick and dying, then they had another thing coming. The back alley behind the hospital was dark, the stench of garbage and rainwater mixing in the air. A familiar figure stood waiting, leaning casually against a brick wall, his silhouette just visible in the dim glow of a nearby street lamp. "Rough day, Doc?" the figure asked, his voice a low murmur. "Rough doesn't even begin to cover it," Ethan muttered, running a hand through his hair. "We lost another one today, another one who couldn't afford the treatment." Marcus, the team's hacker, pushed off the wall and stepped into the light, his face partially hidden beneath the hood of his sweatshirt. "BioNTech strikes again." "But you already know that." "So, what's the plan?" Ethan's jaw tightened. He had spent months watching patients die, waiting for the system to change. It hadn't, and it wouldn't. Not without a push. He turned to Marcus, his eyes sharp with purpose. "We're not waiting anymore. It's time to act." Marcus smirked, pulling a small tablet from his pocket. "I've got everything we need. Access codes, security systems, blueprints. We can hit one of BioNTech's labs tonight, if you're ready." Ethan stared at the screen, the plan already taking shape in his mind. It was reckless, dangerous, and if they got caught, they'd be lucky to spend the rest of their lives rotting in a cell. But they were out of options. Too many people were dying. He wasn't just a doctor anymore. He was going to be a criminal, and he'd do it without hesitation. "I'm ready," Ethan said, his voice firm. "We all are." The warehouse where Ethan's underground team operated was a far cry from the sterile, polished walls of the hospital. It was grimy, cold, and filled with salvaged equipment, and most of it stolen or cobbled together from discarded parts. But it was here that they would do their real work, away from the prying eyes of BioNTech and the corrupt government officials who turned a blind eye to the company's stranglehold on healthcare. Leila Torres was already there when Ethan and Marcus arrived. She stood over a metal table, examining a clone liver, its pale pink tissue glistening under the harsh overhead lights. "This is the last one we've got," she said without looking up. "Unless we get more soon, we're going to start losing people." Leila had been with Ethan since the beginning, a brilliant surgeon with a sharp mind and an even sharper tongue. She had once been a rising star in the medical world, but after crossing paths with Biosyntech and exposing their shady practices, she had been blacklisted, her career all but destroyed. Now, like Ethan, she had turned to the underground, fighting for a system that had turned its back on them both. "We're going out tonight," Ethan said, stepping up beside her. "Marcus has everything we need. We're hitting one of their labs. We get in, grab as much as we can, and get out before they even know we're there." Leela glanced up from her work, her brow furrowed in concern. "And what happens when they find out?" "You know they're not going to let this slide, right?" "Biosyntech doesn't play nice." "They never have," Ethan replied. "But I'm done sitting by while people die because they can't afford to live. We take the risk, or we keep watching them suffer. You know that." Leela stared at him for a moment, then nodded. "All right, let's do it." The Biosyntech lab was a fortress, state-of-the-art security systems, armed guards, and enough surveillance to make even the most seasoned criminal think twice. But Ethan and his team had an advantage. Marcus, the hacker, had spent months mapping out the lab's layout, learning its weaknesses, and figuring out how to bypass its defenses. Now, standing in the shadow of the massive building, Ethan could only hope that Marcus' expertise was as good as he claimed. Marcus tapped away on his tablet, his fingers flying across the screen as lines of code scrolled by. "Give me a few more seconds. And we're in." The doors to the lab slid open with a soft hiss, and Ethan, Leela, and Marcus slipped inside, moving quickly through the darkened halls. The sterile smell of disinfectant filled the air, mingling with the faint hum of machinery. This was where Biosyntech kept its most valuable acid-cloned organs, stored and ready to be sold to the highest bidder. "Security's on a 5-minute loop," Marcus whispered, his eyes scanning the screens. "We've got exactly 4 minutes to get what we need and get out." Ethan led the way into the storage room, his heart pounding in his chest. Rows upon rows of cloned organs were lined upon shelves, each one labeled and tagged with a price that made his blood boil. These were people's lives, reduced to nothing more than a transaction. "Grab as much as you can," Ethan ordered, his voice tense. "We're not leaving until we've got enough to last us a month." Leo moved quickly, packing the organs into insulated containers while Marcus kept watch at the door. Time was ticking, and the longer they stayed, the greater the risk of getting caught. Just as they finished loading the last container, an alarm blared through the building, red lights flashing across the walls. "Shit," Marcus cursed, his fingers flying across the tablet. "They've found us." "We need to move, now." Ethan grabbed the nearest container and bolted for the door, Leela and Marcus close behind. The sound of footsteps echoed through the halls as security guards rushed toward their location. "Take the side exit," Marcus shouted, leading them down a narrow hallway. "It's the only way out." They rounded the corner just as a group of guards appeared at the far end of the hall, their weapons drawn. Ethan's pulse quickened, adrenaline surging through his veins as they sprinted toward the exit. The doors burst open, and they stumbled out into the cool night air, the sound of alarms still ringing in their ears. "We did it," Ethan panted, glancing over at Leela. "We actually did it." Leela wiped the sweat from her brow, her eyes sharp with determination. "This is just the beginning, Ethan. We've poked the hornet's nest. Now we need to be ready for the swarm." Ethan nodded, knowing full well that their fight was far from over. But tonight, they had won a small victory. And for the patients waiting in the shadows, desperate for a chance at life, that was enough. The night was quiet, almost too quiet, as the adrenaline began to ebb from Ethan's veins. They were back at the warehouse, the containers of cloned organs laid out on the cold steel table like trophies of a heist. Marcus was still catching his breath, eyes darting nervously as he scanned through security feeds, while Leela stared at the organs, a mix of triumph and anxiety etched across her face. "This is enough to save dozens," Ethan said, his voice steady but low. "Maybe more." Leela nodded but didn't smile. "Maybe more," Yeah, but you know Biosyntek won't let this go. They'll double down, tighten security, come after us harder. We've painted a target on our backs. Ethan knew she was right. The alarm had gone off too soon. Someone had been tipped off, or they'd been more prepared than expected. Either way, there was no going back now. This wasn't just a one-time job. They'd rattled the cage, and the beast inside would come for them soon enough. Marcus swiped a hand across his tablet, closing out the feeds. I'll change our digital footprint. They won't trace us tonight, but tomorrow might be a different story. We have to be smart about how we move forward, Leela added. We got lucky tonight, but next time, there won't be a next time like this, Ethan interrupted, his voice sharp. We're not just playing defense anymore. We're taking the fight to them. Leela blinked, caught off guard by the sudden edge in his voice. What are you talking about? Ethan turned to face both of them, eyes alight with a fire he hadn't felt in years. We've been reacting to them, hiding in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike. But we've got leverage now. We don't just have organs, so we've got evidence. Marcus raised an eyebrow. Evidence? Ethan pulled a small flash drive from his pocket. While you two were packing up organs, I grabbed something else. Craze files. The room went silent. Marcus's eyes widened, and even Leela's usually cool composure slipped for a moment. You what? Ethan placed the flash drive on the table. Cray's been hiding something. I found encrypted documents, internal memos, stuff they didn't want anyone to see. It's all here. Marcus reached for the drive, his fingers itching to plug it into his tablet, but Ethan stopped him. Not here, not now. We need to be smart about this. If we're going to blow the whistle on Biosyntek, we do it the right way. We expose them, make it impossible for them to bury the truth. Leela crossed her arms, a flicker of doubt in her eyes. And you think this is going to work? You think exposing Cray's dirty laundry will change anything? This is bigger than one man, Ethan. The whole system is built to protect people like him. Ethan met her gaze, unflinching. Maybe, but it's a start. We show the world what they've been doing, sabotaging alternatives, blocking treatments that could save millions. We give people a reason to fight back. The room was thick with tension. Leela bit her lip, clearly weighing her options. She had seen what Ethan's idealism had cost them before, but there was a part of her that wanted to believe that this time, they could win. Marcus broke the silence, his voice low but determined. I can crack the files. We'll need a secure server, a clean network, but I can do it. If we go public with this, it's war. Ethan's jaw tightened. It already is. Days passed in a blur. Marcus worked night and day to decrypt the files, moving their entire operation underground, deeper into the city's forgotten tunnels where Biosyntek's eyes couldn't reach. Every click of Marcus's keyboard felt like the ticking of a time bomb. Meanwhile, the organs they had stolen were being smuggled to patients, transported in unmarked vans to the makeshift clinics that dotted the underbelly of the city. They saved lives in secret, every successful surgery a small victory in a war few knew was being fought. But it wasn't enough. Ethan could feel the weight pressing down on him with each passing hour. He didn't just want to save a few dozen lives, he wanted to change the system, to break the monopoly that had condemned so many to die needlessly. It gnawed at him, driving him harder than ever before. Finally, one late night, Marcus called Ethan and Leela to the warehouse. His face was pale, his eyes bloodshot, but there was a grim satisfaction in his voice. I got it. Ethan and Leela crowded around his screen as Marcus pulled up the decrypted files. It's all here, Marcus said, his voice barely above a whisper. They've been blocking the development of self-regenerating tissue for years. They had the tech decades ago, but they buried it. They bribed officials, sabotaged research, everything to keep cloning as the only viable option. Leela's face drained of color. All to keep people paying for organs. Exactly, Marcus replied. Cray's been at the center of it the whole time. But it's not just him. There are senators, regulators, even doctors who've been on their payroll. If we release this, we blow it all up, Ethan finished for him, His voice steady. Leela ran a hand through her hair, shaking her head. And then what? We get rid of Cray, and another company steps in to take his place. We can't just destroy Thama, we need to replace them with something better. Ethan nodded. That's why we need to be careful. We release this, but we also give people an alternative. We leak the research on self-regenerating tissue, make it available to the public. Once it's out there, no one can control it anymore. Marcus looked up from his screen, a trace of admiration in his eyes. You're talking about giving people hope again. Not just hope, Ethan said, a future. The plan was set into motion the following night. Marcus had hacked into the news networks, creating a secure path to distribute the files across every major media outlet. Ethan and Leela worked with underground contacts to spread the research on self-regenerating tissue, sending it to universities, independent labs, and anyone who could put it to use. It was a delicate operation. If they moved too quickly, Biosyntech would catch on and shut them down before the truth could spread. If they moved too slowly, people would continue to die, their only hope locked behind Biosyntech's corporate walls. The tension was palpable as they worked in silence, each step a potential misstep that could bring everything crashing down. Finally, in the early hours of the morning, Marcus hit the final key. It's done. Ethan's heart raced as the files uploaded, cascading across the internet like wildfire. Within minutes, the news broke. Headlines screamed about the corruption at Biosyntech, about the lives lost due to corporate greed. Social media exploded with outrage, with demands for justice. But it wasn't just the scandal that caught people's attention, it was the research. It was the hope that, for the first time in years, organ transplants wouldn't be a death sentence for those who couldn't afford them. The truth was out, and it couldn't be taken back. Ethan leaned back in his chair, exhaustion finally settling over him. We did it. Leela smiled, a rare, genuine smile. We really did. But even as they celebrated, Ethan knew the fight wasn't over. Biosyntech wouldn't go down without a fight, and the system that had allowed them to thrive wouldn't crumble overnight. They had won a battle, but the war was far from over. Still, for the first time in years, Ethan allowed himself to believe in a better future. A future where no one would have to die because they couldn't afford to live. And that, he realized, was worth everything.